Hey everyone in the Reclaiming You Lounge. So hopefully you're all keeping well. It is quite chilly here, and I know it's quite chilly in the rest of the country or various parts of. So hopefully you're keeping warm. And I won't stay too long, but I just wanted to jump on. So first of all, just wanted to say I'm absolutely loving human design. So you probably saw I did a post a few days back talking about the fact that I'm doing a 9-month human design and Gene Keys mastery course. It's a real kind of deep dive, very high touch kind of container that I'm in. Fantastic. So really fascinating to find out about the different types. And it's really kind of in alignment with everything else that I'm doing, because my whole thing is just I love helping people to reclaim their power when it comes to health, healing, any of these other modalities. So this just fits so beautifully. Same with life purpose astrology. It just really helps people to understand themselves better. And this is very much the same with human design. You're just understanding yourself better. It just really is eye-opening. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm actually here to talk about leaky gut, because as I mentioned the other day when we did our oral microbiome little chat or little training or live stream, if you will, I'm just finishing off CPE points. So I'm getting there. So anyway, I spent a couple of hours yesterday. I carved out time to listen to a few different masterclasses. So one was on leaky gut, and I thought I just wanted to share this because really, really common, and it's something that people do talk about a fair bit. And it's one of those things, it's kind of quite tricky to test in the sense that if you go to just a GP or through the orthodox medical system, there's various markers that they can look at, but, they're not necessarily going to be as accurate as kind of doing a few different testing methods, which we'll look at sort of shortly. But when we talk about leaky gut syndrome, it's, really just that intestinal permeability. So, when you think about the intestinal membrane, it's like one cell thick, as they say. So that can become more permeable, like more gappy for various reasons. That's essentially what it is, like leaky gut. It's kind of as it suggests. It's not like leaking feces. Like someone said that to me once, but I'm not leaking feces. I'm like, it's not that. It's literally that intestinal permeability. So as I said, it's like there's a loss of integrity between the cells of the small intestine. That's essentially what it is. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Lee, hey, how are you? So I'm just talking about leaky gut. We're talking about intestinal permeability. So the concept of leaky gut was introduced back in the 1960s, and I would say it's more recent times that, people are really recognizing that there is potentially a link or a correlation between, intestinal permeability or this leaky gut, this, membrane that's becoming more permeable, with the development of disease and the severity of disease. So there's various studies that are showing that. So, they're kind of finding that because of this intestinal permeability, it can precede various diseases. It can, those that have it have a worse well-being compared to healthy adults, so really, really important to consider it. But it's interesting because you get acute intestinal permeability, which I hadn't really thought about, but that's kind of more in a hospital setting. So that's where someone has like, pancreatitis and sepsis and things like that. Whereas the low-grade chronic intestinal permeability is more so what is more common, and it kind of flies under the radar, but often that's the one that's kind of linked more with autoimmune conditions, gut conditions and various metabolic conditions. And what I just wanted to share, because I found this quite interesting, and it's something that I hadn't really thought about, and I might not have even really, was aware of this, but there's various subgroups of intestinal permeability. So, one is where it's induced by alcohol. So alcohol can definitely increase that intestinal permeability. And what's interesting is exercise can as well. So, people that are doing really prolonged exercise, that has been shown to cause intestinal permeability. So if you're doing like, say, 60 minutes running, and you're doing that at 70% of your highest output, that's been shown to cause, intestinal permeability. Even if you're doing a 20-minute run and you're doing that at 80% of your maximum output, that has also been shown to increase intestinal permeability. So that's really kind of interesting, because most people wouldn't necessarily make that link between doing quite, high intensity exercise and, leaky gut. So that's the two so far. We've got the alcohol induced intestinal permeability. You've got the exercise induced, but then there's also kind of like a genetic induced component. And I guess that makes sense, because you know how some like inflammatory bowel diseases, there can be a genetic link. Then there's like medication-induced intestinal permeability. So from, NSAIDs and other medications like that, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, even things like some of the proton pump inhibitors like Nexiums and stuff like that. Interestingly, pregnancy-induced intestinal permeability, so that's also quite common. Disease-induced intestinal permeability, so from various disease states, that's causing that gut to become more leaky. Diet-induced, and this can be because people are eating a lot of pro-inflammatory foods that they're sensitive to, so over time that's increasing that permeability, like the wheat and the gluten and all those dairy and stuff that they might be sensitive to. There's metabolic-induced as well as dysbiosis-induced, so that's where there's more pathogens and stuff like that. So anyway, I just sort of thought, quite interesting. Nilva, hi, how are you? And so what they actually reckon is 1 in 3 people experience intestinal permeability, which is quite interesting. So, and what they're finding is the prevalence of this altered, intestinal permeability is estimated to be up to 87% in diseases with a known association, compared to only about 5% in healthy subjects. So there definitely does seem to be that link there. And what they've found as well, and this is really interesting too, they've found that what can increase your risk of, having this leaky gut or this increased permeability there in that intestinal, small intestine lining, definitely inflammation and things like that. Hypoglycemia, so if there's, dysregulated sugar, so obviously it's another reason to not be having too much sugar. Dyslipidemia, so that's if people have, like high cholesterol, high triglycerides, that all increases the risk of having this intestinal permeability. Tracy Ann, hi. Advanced disease. But also what is interesting is they've found anything above the decibel of like a lawnmower can induce intestinal permeability. I found that fascinating, because how often do people listen to really loud music? Or how like if you go to a pub or something, and I know in the past when I've gone to a pub and they've got like a live band, and how sometimes it is so loud. So that is in causing and inducing this leaky gut, this intestinal permeability. So I just found that really fascinating. As I said, like the high intensity exercise, the pregnancy, and as I said, even like loud noises can all induce intestinal permeability. So in terms of, as I said, measuring it, it's kind of something, because if you went to like mainstream medicine probably doesn't necessarily recognize leaky gut syndrome as much as, if you go and see an integrative GP or a naturopath or, health coach, things like that. But when you test it, they do this like dual sugar test, which is kind of that lactulose mannitol test that they can do, where you ingest the this sugary mix. And based on the ratios, they can see whether there is, like that intestinal permeability. There's also other markers, like they can look at zonulin, this marker in your stool. They can look at it in your blood. They can look at the mucus barrier. Like there are ways of potentially testing, well, does the person have leaky gut? So I know some of the functional labs, so I often will use Nutripath, like down in Victoria. So they have various, like complete microbiome mapping, complete digestive stool analysis, functional labs, where you can actually see some of this stuff, like in terms of some of these markers, like, just to help you see whether there is potentially this intestinal permeability. So, as I said, really interesting. But in terms of treatment, definitely what you should be considering, of course, is maybe you can either do a food intolerance yourself, or you could work with someone to see about, testing what you're sensitive to and taking yourself off it. So that's often what people would do, like in a leaky gut kind of protocol. It's good to see, first of all, well, are there pathogens present? Like if there's parasites or something, you've got to treat them first, because they can continue to almost like poke holes in the membrane walls, if that makes sense. So, definitely you want to consider that maybe, and then also maybe look at food sensitivity. So it's like you treat the parasites, or whether it's the bacteria or whatever else, get off those food sensitivities and kind of heal that gut. Meanwhile, you want to be reducing alcohol, because we saw that alcohol consumption, even anything above, like I think they even said something, it was crazy. Like I remember writing it down. It was something like even a standard drink can increase intestinal permeability. It's like, wow. So, when you're kind of trying to treat it, you have to get off alcohol. Minerals like zinc, vitamin D is good. Turmeric, glutamine, how that's like an amino acid. It's like it's like fuel for the intestinal cells. So they're all really quite useful. Obviously, you don't want to be doing intense exercise, because we saw that can induce intestinal permeability. You want to be having sufficient protein so you don't have unstable, blood glucose, and you want to be kind of managing your lipids, because that's all, as I said, been shown to induce it as well. There's another Saccharomyces boulardii. You might have heard of that. It's a non-pathogenic yeast, but that's kind of been quite useful to help, especially if there's been, candida present, or there's been another marker they can look at is low secretory IgA, which could be low from, such things as like stress and, conditions like that. So that's all useful. Probiotics can be useful, but definitely when you look at things that are going to improve your leaky gut, things like, organic foods, maybe fermented foods. People talk about bone broth, they're quite useful too, unless you're a really high histamine person. If you get a lot of hay fever in that, you've got to be a bit cautious with bone broths. I know they're all the rage. But if your histamine's not too bad, I'm a high histamine person. I usually have broth maybe once every few weeks, and it seems to be okay. I probably wouldn't have it every day. I think that would set it all off. Collagen, I do have, Hi, Scott. Hi, Liz. Definitely I have collagen every day. Once you're over 25, your collagen starts to break down anyway. So you need collagen for, your connective tissue and your hair and your skin and your bones and everything. But also that can help with the intestinal wall. Breathing exercises, stress management, all of that sort of stuff, meditation, yoga, that's all going to help, with improving that gut wall function. And, as I said, some of the nutrients like the zinc, the glutamine, the vitamin D, the vitamin C, magnesium, because we know that helps with stress. I love magnesium. It's one of the things I recommend a lot to people, and I know I take it myself every single day. And even like with Richard, if he's been standing on his legs all day, like behind the machine, if he's been at one of the cafes, I give him like a magnesium phosphate, and he'll chew it within 10 minutes. It's fine, like the pain. It's quite interesting. But the B vitamins as well are important. We know the B vitamins help with, everything from energy to thyroid to adrenals, but they're also important as, just another nutrient to help with that gut lining. But the things, as I said, that will exacerbate it and cause more leaky gut, gluten-containing foods, dairy products, refined sugar, drugs like, as I said, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medication, antibiotics, even being overweight, they're all going to exacerbate this leaky gut. So what they've found is even just reducing someone's BMI can improve intestinal permeability. So just say someone has a BMI, the body mass index of say 43, they reckon that even just decreasing that to 36, that has been shown to significantly improve intestinal permeability. So, and even with someone with, when looking at blood glucose, as that improves, that's also helped improve intestinal permeability. As we know, everything is always linked. That's why I always talk about, really doing this holistic health and wellness, working on all levels, because, stress is going to exacerbate anything. So I talk about that all the time. But yeah, what I was saying earlier is, so one standard drink can induce intestinal permeability within 30 minutes in a healthy person. So I found that fascinating. But how do you know if you've got it? As I said, it could be that you have, sometimes it's gut symptoms. It's not always, but if someone says, they've got a lot of bloating and gas, a lot of discomfort, maybe they're having, changing bowel motions, all of that sort of stuff, maybe, a lot of stomach grumbling and, various things like that could potentially show that, there is leaky gut. But as I said, quite often it precedes autoimmune conditions. So sometimes if people have like Hashimoto's or, rheumatoid arthritis or things like that, where, as I said, there is that autoimmune component, it really does pay to have a look at, whether there is leaky gut present. And then once you treat that, it significantly, starts to improve those other symptoms. So, really important. But, as always, you've got to look at everything. So, look at the nervous system, because quite often it's the stress, the anxiety, the not sleeping great, which is making everything worse. So, so I just sort of found that interesting. So anyway, as I said, that's kind of some of the key things I just wanted to share with you, that, they're the things that will increase your, the permeability of the gut, which, as I said, it's only like one cell sort of thick, that intestinal membrane, that intestinal wall. So, all those factors of pregnancy, alcohol, too much exercise, that can all increase the permeability of the gut. As I said, there's a few different tests. There's the dual sugar test. There's other tools like the stool zonulin, the blood zonulin, things like markers like that, which you're not going to get from your standard doctor. You do have to go and see either a naturopath or an integrative GP. But, sometimes it's worth it if you feel like you, as I said, have a lot of gut issues, or maybe you're finding that you do have an autoimmune condition, or you do have, metabolic X syndrome, which is kind of that cluster of, blood pressure and excess weight, or higher BMI, or, high cholesterol, that sort of stuff. It might be worth even looking into it just to see if there is leaky gut. And also looking at blood tests, seeing the inflammation, seeing your vitamin D status, seeing your zinc levels, seeing your B12, like they're all important to know as well, your iron, because sometimes if you've perpetually got low iron, maybe you're not absorbing some of the minerals, that's quite common as well. So anyway, as I said, I'll love you and leave you. I do have to go and make dinner, but I just wanted to share that little bit of information because I found it quite useful. So I guess the key takeout is, as always, really manage your stress the best that you can. So as we know, sometimes it is a bit of a mindset shift, meditation, really kind of slowing down, really important, having those fresh foods, kind of really cutting back on alcohol and sugar and intense exercise, interestingly enough, especially if there is gut sort of symptoms present or autoimmune conditions, and especially when you want to treat the gut. And as I said, there is various testing options just to see the extent of the leaky gut, but definitely you need to be able to get off those foods that are kind of exacerbating it and then heal the gut, but also just making sure that if there is parasites or bacteria or even an excess of fungus and things, that's treated, because if that's not treated, it's kind of like you can heal the gut as much as you want, but, it might not be addressing why you actually have the problem. So, always, as I said, it's best to test, don't guess. So anyway, have a good evening, and I will be in here soon. Okay, bye.